So the first part of this CNC machine is the metal frame, and here we have some long lengths of about 2mm thick steel tubing that we need to cut to the right lengths, and then we also need to plug up the ends, and so what we're doing, we're making this small bracket which is going to be folded out. It will slide into the end, it will have a nut in it welded to it, and then we will weld that in the end, which will allow us to bolt the tubes together. And this is really only to start with. Once we're happy with the machine's levelness and everything else, squareness, then we will probably weld it together, because these bolts will probably rattle undone with the router going the speed that it does. So that's just one of the brackets made now, and there's plenty more to make. I'm not quite sure how many in total, I haven't quite added it up, but we know we need, I don't know, 6 or 7 of these. Probably 8, it's going to be an even number. So we've just welded on the nut on the back, M8 nuts, and now we're going to weld this bracket in the end of the tube. So that's now welded in the end, and we put a longer thread in there so we could see that it was pretty much straight. As straight as we could make it anyway. So we've just got to clean up the very end of this tube now, so make sure it's absolutely square. And we can continue making brackets. So this was the first trial, just to make sure that that we wanted to put this bracket in and that it would hold and work well. So this was the first test. We can carry on making brackets now. So here we have 19 brackets. I think we only need 18 that go in the end of the pipes, in the square box sections that we're going to use to make the frame. So we're just putting the brackets with the nuts welded on into the ends of the tube. So we just put it slightly below the lip so we've got room to weld. Put the bolt in there just to make sure it's straight, and then just knock it so it's absolutely straight. That looks straight. So they've all now been welded in and all cleaned up, ready for a bit of spray on them, stop them going rusty. So we've measured out the 3 positions for the cross members, and we're just going to drill the central one now. They've already been piloted, so we can get a good accurate 8mm hole for the M8 bolt to go through here. So that's the frame now all bolted together. Well, on the ends anyway, not the bars between. That's just actually positioned so you can see what it's going to look like when it's finished. So this is one of the side guides, or side supports, and we're cutting out the motor hole, and some of the bearing holes have already been drilled out. So we've bolted the bearings in place, and we've also positioned the motor and the freewheeling other pulley, which just goes on the back of the belt, as you can see. We've got both sides on, only the belt on this side, just so we can see that everything's lining up as it should do. So now we're making up the 2 side rails, the one that goes on the top and the one that goes on the bottom, and we're just drilling and tapping these now. So we now drilled and tapped the 2 cross members, and they've got the guide rails on them, and they're joined together now, and now we've got some quite nice movement. So this is the main structure of the bottom of the table, which is the 2 side beams and then the 3 cross beams, and we're just going to put some paint on them now. So all painted up, ready for the assembly. These are other parts that have been painted up, all part of the frame. So first things first, we need to bolt these sections onto the end of the tubes, and we're going to do that using the M8 hex bolt there. Next we need to bolt on the front side of these yellow brackets onto the front of these outer framework. Next part is to put the guide rails along this section here, both these sections, and as you can see the holes are slightly facing one way. They're on either one side or the other side, and that is the top side of the guide rail. And these are the fixings for the channel. So the first things first is you need to screw on these brackets onto the outer frame on the back and the front, noting the one slot on the back and the two slots on the front. And these are for belt adjustments. Next thing is the guide rails to go on the top of these outer frame sections that we're making, and they are handed, so make sure you get them the right way around. And once the guide rails are screwed on these top supports with the washers, and you can tell which is the top side because this is flush on this side, and if you look at, and that's flush on that side, if you look at this one you'll see it's actually stepped down slightly. So this is that would be the bottom side, this is the top side. So once the guide rails are on, we can start building up the carriage plates, and here we've already got 2 of the bearings on, and we've got to build the other one up. 4 bearings on each plate. And note that you can only put the second bearing on, the lower bearing, once it's actually on the rail itself. So you need to put the top bearings in first, hook it onto the rail, and then put the bottom bearings on. And they're done up with block nuts, so they're not come undone. So the next part of the build is to put this free roller on, and this goes in the hole at the bottom here with the nuts on in this orientation. So there are 3 nylocks, 2 in the normal orientation and the third in a reverse orientation, and you will have to thread it through the nylock first in order to tap part of the nylon thread in there in order to get it on that way, because it's not easy. So that's the first nut in on the roller, and now the next one needs to be spaced to allow the roller to be in the centre of the metal tubes. So when done it should look something like that. So with the gear on the motor already, the motor is then inserted from the other side through the back, through here, and sticks out this side. So that's bolted in like so, and then you need to replicate exactly the same on the other side with the other motor. Next we need to assemble the guide rails that go from left to right. So we're just going to put these onto the beams and then put them in position. And just before we bolt the guide rails on, the left and right guide rails, you'll note that there's 1, 2, 3, 4 holes. This is one position here and here, and this is the other position, and we're going to go on the lower position. If later on we need to do something that's a lot wider or a lot higher off the table, then we can move the carriage up to a higher height, and these are for the belts, for the different heights of the belts that you're going to need when you actually change position. So this is going to be the bottom position when it's here and here, and then this one is going to be the top position for the belt. So just so you can see, the bottom bar faces forward with the roller bearing guide on the front, and the other one faces backwards. And now we've got the movement whereupon it's all joined. The next part of the job is to build up this head unit, which has all the guides and the screw thread through it, and also 4 of the limit switches, which you can see we've positioned on already. So now we're going to fit the guide screw, and then the actual guide, the actual horizontal guides as well. So we fitted this bracket across the top, and this is the bracket that actually helps the motor bracket stay where it is. And then on this side as we turn it over, you can see we've got the screw thread on. You can see where the limit switch is now. This will actually hit the limit switches for the vertical. And there's also this bracket on the end here where, should anything fail with regards to this thread, the thread actually can't come out because it's only grub screwed here, and up here is the weight of everything that's actually on the machine. So if this was to slip, it can only fall down less than a millimetre before it's actually stopped. So once you've done the central one, you do the two outside ones, and just prior to doing that you just drop the bolts through, which will hold the bearings on the other side. So this is how you set up the bearings on the back. You have the first two against the sheet, these two here on the bottom, and then the top ones you put the bolt all the way through the nylock to lock it on, then you put another nylock on, and then you put another bearing on, and then these at the moment are just non-nylock versions, so that you can position the bearing exactly as it should be on the rails. So obviously one on one rail, one on the other rail, and this makes sure you can get it absolutely square. Once you've got it square, you can then take this nut off and the back plate can go on. And now you can see the positioning of the rollers actually on the guide rails themselves. So this is pretty square now, and we can now fit the back sheet. So with that now hooked on in place, waiting for the back plate, we're now putting the roller bearing on the back plate and also the motor. So that's the motor and the freewheeling pulley all in place. Now we need to fit this to the back of the head unit. That's now with the back plate positioned on, and you just need to check the distance between the two plates, make sure it's perfectly even up the entire length of it and both sides, and then you can put the fixing nuts on the nylocks on the back of it. Now we need to fit these four bearings, and these go underneath the rails on both the top and bottom. So as you would see it here, there's a screw hole just there, and that is the one for the bearing on the bottom. There's one on the other side, and then on the back side there's also holes for bearings. You can probably just see a little bit of light through there. That's the other bearing hole, and so there's those on both sides, and that keeps the head firmly in place. So now you can just about see the bearing underneath the main bearing there. So there's the main bearing and the other one's there, and then you just get a slight glance of the other bearing at the bottom of that channel, and that's the top bearing. So the larger bearings are the main bearings where all the weight is on. The other bearings are just guides. Next part is fitting the belt on the left and right side. And it's very simple. You just fit it through the slot and then feed it through this bracket too, and I'll just show that in a second. And then you fit a locking mechanism and then the adjuster screw. So this is the belt tensioning system, whereupon the belt slides through this L or a U-shaped bracket with one side longer than the other. Then another bracket is slid in above, which actually pushes the teeth down inside this bracket. Then the screw goes in, and as you do the screw up, it actually pulls out and tensions the belt. And the same is on the other side, so you've got tension on both sides. Next part of the assembly was to wire up the limit switches on the vertical and the horizontal plane. And here you can see they're looped in and out of, the top and bottom is looped in and out, and the side to side is looped in and out, so you've only got two wires at the top for connections. So the next part is to build up this front plate, and the first thing we're going to put on is the brackets to hold the router. So these have just been lightly tightened in place, and now we're going to fit this panel to the head unit itself. So once that's in place, we then need to fit the strengtheners to the side of the front plate, and they go behind the front plate there. So that's now got the strengtheners on the front plate as well. I think the next thing is to probably fit the router. So the next thing is to put the belt on, and first of all you fix the end at the back. So you slip the belt through, then force the bracket in above, which forces the teeth down into the metal, so that clamps that end, and then the belt is fed through the motor and the guide pulley, and then when it comes to this end, the belt is fed through the bottom hole, then round and then back into the top hole, whereupon it's clamped, and then when you drop the screw it forces this metal bar out, causing the belt to tension. So now the belt has now got tension on it. Next thing is the limit switch bracket with the limit switch on it, and this is exactly the same at the other end as well. So that's the limit switch for the back of the machine.